All right, so we're all set to get going here. As I mentioned, my name is Matt. I'm a customer support engineer here at Userscape. And today we're going to be looking at categories, statuses, and custom fields, and looking at some of the things that we can do inside of HelpSpot with those three different items. A couple of housekeeping things just kind of as we get rolling here. First of all, if you have any questions during our time here, feel free to use the questions panel inside of GoToMeeting to ask those questions. I have some planned stuff I'm going to be going through here in the beginning. So if, as I'm going through those things, if questions come up, feel free to just shoot that into the questions area. And then we're going to have some Q&A time at the end. So those will be queued up, and I'll try to work through all those questions and get everything answered for everyone. So feel free to just pop your questions in there as they come to you. Second of all, this session is going to be recorded. So if you are wanting to refer back to it later, or if you want to send it to a colleague, you'll be able to do that. We will be posting the recording up here on the advanced training page up on HelpSpot's website, or you can find the HelpSpot channel out on YouTube. It'll be posted out there as well. So feel free to make use of that recording after the fact. All right, so with those two things out of the way, we'll go ahead and start diving into our topics for today. So the first thing I wanted to cover today is the status object inside of HelpSpot. And when you're working in requests, the status area is just found right here. And the status is going to tell us what the current state of the request is. So we have some pre-built statuses here. These just come installed with HelpSpot. But what we're going to look at today is that we can customize these to whatever we really want to have listed here. Usually what you want to define here is going to be different states that your request could be in. So we have some examples here like problem solved, is it escalated, are we waiting for a reply from the customer, different things like that. You might come up with some other statuses though. For instance, maybe you're waiting on a vendor, or maybe you need to give them a call back. So different things like that you could also have as statuses. So all of these statuses are customizable through the admin area. And this is probably the simplest object that we're going to look at today, because really all that we can do with statuses is add them and delete them. So if we look in the admin area here, we can go under organize and go to status types. And here's where each of our statuses is defined. You'll notice here though that one status isn't shown, and that is the active status. So the active status is a special status. That active status cannot be deleted or changed, and that's going to be the status that a request is returned to whenever a request is reopened by a customer. So if a customer emails back in and reopens the request, it's going to be returned back to that active status. And it's also going to be a status that a request cannot be closed in. So if a request is currently in the active status, you will be prompted to change the status to something else before you close that request out. So in order to modify statuses, we can just click on any status here, and we can make edits to its name. So if we want to have something other than problem solved, we could go ahead and do that. We can also just make statuses inactive, which is going to remove them from the select list. Or we can also add new statuses. So like I mentioned, maybe we have a callback status. So maybe we want to add that status in. And that's really all there is to it. And you can also rearrange these statuses. So if there's a particular order that kind of makes sense in the user interface for you, for the ones that are maybe more commonly used and the ones that aren't as commonly used, you can go ahead and set that order here and just drag and drop the statuses to the appropriate locations that you want. So that's really pretty much all there is to say about statuses. Statuses are real simple. There's not a lot to them, but just remember that with status, we're going to indicate what the current state of the request is. Just one other thing to note about statuses is that you can use the status to key other actions inside of HelpSpot. So you can have triggers fire when a request is in a current status. You can have automation rules run on requests with current statuses. So just keep that in mind too, that when you're thinking about adding some automation to your HelpSpot installation, you might want to add some statuses in order for you to do some of those automated actions. All right, so the next area that we're going to look at are categories. And categories are significantly more complex than the status object that we just looked at. So categories are the primary way that requests are organized inside of HelpSpot. So you might want to think about a couple different ways of setting up categories. But one thing to remember right off the bat is that categories are going to control a lot of things about how requests work inside of HelpSpot. So when you're thinking about your organization, you might want your categories to be departments. So in this case, I have a category set up here that's human resources. So you might have a human resources category, an IT category, a sales category. So whatever departments you have inside of your organization. It could also be, if you're just using HelpSpot within an individual department, it could be more of a problem type. So maybe say you're working in a IT organization and you just want to have different IT problem types. Is it a network problem? Is it a server-based problem? Is it a client machine problem? So you could build out your categories in that way as well. Or maybe your categories would make most sense as buildings. So maybe you have a number of buildings on your campus and you want to categorize the requests by what building that request is for. One thing you'll want to remember, though, is that when you're setting up categories, you might want to ask yourself these questions in order to kind of determine what should I make a category and what shouldn't I, is let's ask ourselves, do we have a group of staff that we want to distribute requests to or be limited to certain areas? Request distribution and limiting of permissions are easily done through categories. So if you're going to have those kinds of groups, you'll probably want to make them into categories. Also, you'll want to ask yourself, do you have custom fields that you only want available in certain areas? Custom field visibility is also tied to categories. So if you have any custom fields you're wanting to control conditionally like that, you'll want to make those kind of criteria into categories as well. So for the sake of example today, I'm going to decide that I want to set up my HelpSpot installation here according to departments. And I'm going to use my 3 examples that I mentioned earlier. I have an HR department, an IT department, and a sales department. And they're all going to be using HelpSpot. And we're going to look at kind of how we can configure that and set that up here. So I already have one category set up right up here, and we'll go ahead and edit that in just a little bit. But let's start by setting up our other categories that we need, and we'll just walk through a few of the options that we have while we do that. So my next category I'm going to set up is my IT category. And right off the bat here, we have a category grouping that we can select. And now the category grouping is just it's a visual organization. So it allows us to group requests, or group categories, excuse me, by a parent folder, basically. So for example, maybe if you had those problem types I was talking about earlier, maybe you would have a grouping of server, and then underneath that you would have database servers, application servers, and mail servers, let's say. And so you could group all of those 3 categories together, and then they would be visually grouped inside of the user interface. We aren't going to use any groupings today just because we're working with just 3 departments. All right, my next option here is I have the option to control the visibility of this category. Now you can conditionally make categories visible on the request portal. So where that will show up is out here on the customer facing portal. I can control when I'm submitting a request if I have a category drop down here and if I show any categories that a customer can select. Now, if you don't have any public categories, all requests are just going to come in without any category assigned to them. However, you might want to allow people to select the category for some reasons that we'll look at down below, having to do with automatic assignment of requests. So let's go ahead and make this public here so that then we'll be able to see it on the portal. Now, my next option down here is the category staff members. Now, these are the staff that can be assigned requests in this category. So any staff member that I select here will be able to handle requests in this category. Now, in addition to that, this is also going to control request visibility when we look at that, and it's also going to determine our pool for auto assignments. So any users that I select here, I'm going to then be able to go down here and choose them as a default staff contact. So you would use this if I wanted to have a single person that handles all requests by default in this category. So maybe if you're a smaller organization and you just have one main point person for IT, you could add that person and just have all the IT requests by default go into their queue. But let's say I have my two individuals here, Chris and Eric, and I actually want to distribute requests between these two individuals. What I can do in that case is I can go ahead and set up a auto assignment rule. Now you'll see my first option here is just to assign the requests as they come in to the default contact, and that would just be my contact that I select up here. But I can also choose various methods of round robining or distributing requests among my staff pool here. In this case, I'm going to choose to do a round robin even distribution. So what that means is as IT related requests come in, the first one will get assigned to Chris, the next one will get assigned to Eric, the next one after that will get assigned to Chris, and so on and so forth. Now, one thing to note about these round robin assignments is that once you assign staff members, you might run into a situation where, let's say Eric goes on vacation. Well, what do you do in that case? Because you don't want requests getting assigned to Eric automatically when he's not in the office. HelpSpot has a built-in out-of-office rule that you can set up on each staff profile. And so when a staff member marks themselves as out of the office, they are taken out of this round robin pool then at that point. So in that case, if Eric marked himself as out of the office, all the requests would end up just going to Chris. All right, so that's our staff assignment, and we're going to get into permissions in a little bit, and we'll look at how we can use these category staff members also to assign permissions. Next down in my options here, I have reporting tags. Now, reporting tags are going to allow us to set up tags that can be selected for further categorization of each request. So reporting tags are useful for just kind of adding some very easy to select extra metadata around a request. So in our IT example here, maybe we're going to add some reporting tags for kind of the type of IT issue that we're dealing with. So we'll make a software tag, a hardware tag, printer, email, server, and cell phone. All right. So then now we have some reporting tags. Now each of these are going to be selectable so that you can just add some extra data around what kind of problem this is. And you can use these reporting tags in things like triggers and automations in order to perform other actions if you want to. You can also use them in reports to see, does it take longer for us to respond to, say, a cell phone issue than a server issue, things like that. Then finally down here, I have custom field assignment. We haven't set up any custom fields yet, and I usually like to do my custom field assignment from the custom field area. So we'll look at that in just a little bit, but you can set up what custom fields are available for a category right here as well. All right, so we're go ahead and add this category. And then I have another category I need to add, which is just for my sales team. And so I'll just do that here real quickly. All right, so I now have my 3 categories selected here. I'm going to go ahead and edit my human resources one here as well. And we're going to add a user to this one. Let's say Samantha is our human resources person. And we'll also make this public. So just returning to that public setting here real quick, if we look over at our portal and we refresh our portal now that we have added some categories, you can see we now get a category selection here where our customers can select what category their request is in. So that's how that works. Okay, so we have our categories set up and requests are going to start flowing into each of these categories. But now we have a problem. By default, every category is going to be visible to all staff members. So even though we've selected specific staff members that are assignable in each category, that only controls who can be assigned the requests. That doesn't control who can view the requests. So any of these human resources requests, if we go ahead and look at one of those, so let's select human resources, you'll see that my only options here are to send that request to Samara. But I'm still able to, even after I update this request and send it over to Samara, I'm still able to view this request and work with it just fine. So that could be a problem because you might not want your salespeople to view all of the HR requests inside of your HelpSpot installation. So we can do something about this through the use of permission groups. So let's head back over to the admin area and then head into the permission group area. So each staff member inside of HelpSpot is assigned a permission group. And we're going to go ahead and add a new group that's for our salespeople. And what we're going to do is we're going to limit those salespeople so that they can't see requests that aren't theirs. So I'm going to go ahead and make a new group called sales. And I have a bunch of controls here over what they can see and do inside of HelpSpot. We'll just leave all of these as default for now, but you can look through those and see all the things you can turn on and off. The important thing for our purposes here right now is this bottom option here, which is limit to assigned categories only. And so what this is going to allow me to do is it's going to allow me to make all of my sales users so that they can only see other users and assign to other users in the same categories that they are in. So any requests that are not in their categories are going to be invisible to them. If they try to set up a filter or anything like that, or just put in a request ID, they aren't going to be able to pull up that request if it's not in their category. All right, so we have this set up as limited to assigned categories only. We're going to go ahead and add that group. All right, and now we need to assign some people to that permission group. So let me go and find one of my salespeople. I believe Glenn was one of my salespeople. Let's check and see. Oh, he is not, but I'll make him a salesperson. So I've just set him to the category of sales. And now I'm also going to set his permission group to sales. All right. So now that I have that done, let me see if I can log in as him, and we'll see what that looks like. 1 second while I get logged in here. All right. So here is my login with Glenn. And we'll see that in this login, if I look at all of the open requests, I can't see any of the requests because there aren't any sales requests right now. So let's go ahead and assign a sales request, and we'll see that I'm only able to see those sales requests. So I'm just going to go and grab another item here, and we'll just go ahead and put that in the inbox under the sales category. And so now if I switch back to Glenn's login, there we go, here we are with Glenn. And I look at my all open. All right, I'm now able to see that request that is in my category. So now I can go ahead and look at it here, and you'll see that I'm not even able to assign requests to other categories here. I'm just limited to working in my sales category. So as far as I'm concerned, sales is the only thing that's going on inside of HelpSpot here. So this can be really helpful if you're setting up multiple departments inside of one HelpSpot installation. All right, so that covers categories. And now from categories, we're going to move into custom fields next. Now, as I mentioned, custom fields and categories are related because custom fields are tied to a set of categories. So let's go ahead and just start walking through making a few custom fields here, and we'll kind of see how that process works. So I'm just in the admin area, and I'm going to the custom fields area, and now I'm presented with a big long list of the different types of custom fields that I can create. Now, most of these are going to be pretty self-explanatory. Things like a predefined list is just a list of values that I can select. A drill down list is a multi-level select. Text field, it's just what it sounds like. So these are pretty simple, easy to understand kinds of fields. Now, custom fields are first-class citizens inside of HelpSpot. So once I create a custom field, I'm going to be able to build filters, run automations, have triggers run, use them in email templates. I can use them pretty much anywhere that I can use any other field inside of HelpSpot. So when you're setting up custom fields, kind of think about all those different use cases and places you might want to sprinkle in some extra data into your HelpSpot installation. So in this case, for this first one, let's just do a simple example. I'm just going to add a predefined list with a priority status for my sales team so that I can set a priority on kind of my most important clients that I want my sales team to work with. All right, so now that I've selected the kind of field that I want to create, I'm taken to step 2, and I'm gonna just be giving this a name. So we'll call this sales priority. And then I can go ahead and define my list items here. So we'll just create 3 different ones here. We'll create a high priority, medium, and low. And now with the predefined list, I have a fun little feature here that I can add. I can actually tag each of these with colors so that when they're used inside of filters, you'll see that color. So I'm going to go ahead and color code these as long as I'm in here. All right, there we go. And now you can see I can start to select the custom field visibility. Now my top option here is to select if I just want them to be always visible across all categories. So if I wanted this priority custom field just to be always visible, I could choose that. But in this case, I want it to be visible in selected categories. And since this is a sales priority, I'm only going to have that inside of the sales category. Now I can also choose if I want this field to be required. What making the field required is going to do is it's going to make it so that you can't update the request until you fill in that field. Or if you're creating a brand new field from the admin or a brand new request from the admin area, you'll need to fill in that field before you're allowed to create that request. In this case, the priority, while important, probably doesn't rise to the level of being required. So I'm going to leave that blank here. I could choose also to show this on the public request form, just like I did for the categories. In this case, for this sales priority, I'm going to choose to not have that shown. So let's go ahead and create that field. All right, so now that field is defined. Now, I can go back into my workspace at this point and start to use that custom field right away. So if I go ahead and go into a request, set its category to sales, there it is right there. And I can also do things like adding it to filters, different things like that. So I could go into my all open here, edit this filter, and say I want to display a new column, want to display my sales priority. Save that, so that's now shown. And so if I start to edit some of these here, there we go. All right, so now my sales priorities starts to show up here. So adding a basic custom field is pretty straightforward. You basically just add it and you can start using it throughout the HelpSpot interface right away. There are some more complicated custom fields though that I want to dig into a little bit more. What we looked at here is going to be basically the same process for adding a text field, anything like that. You're going to follow those basic same steps of assigning the category, all of those things. But there are a couple of custom field types that have some more customizable options. So one of those is a regular expression field. Now, regular expression is a way of creating a syntax that will filter an input and determine whether the input matches that filter or not. So what you can do with a regular expression field is you can filter and check if a input matches your regular expression. And if that match is not found, we won't allow that entry into the custom field. If it does match, then we'll allow that entry. So this is great for things that are structured data, like maybe zip codes. You know that the zip code is going to have a certain number of digits and it should all be numbers. So if you had a custom field for a zip code, you could create that criteria. Or maybe you have a specific format for your staff ID. So let's say maybe our HR department needs the staff ID on every request that they handle. So I could create a new field called staff ID, and we're going to put it in the human resources area. And now I can go ahead and put in a regular expression that's going to check my staff ID format. And in this case, what I'm just using as an example is I'm going to say that all of my staff IDs start with F00, and then they're going to have 6 digits after that. And so this is the regular expression for that. So I'm saying starts with F00 and then has 6 digits after that. Now, regular expressions are a very complicated and powerful format. And so what I would suggest is if you Google regular expression checker, there are tools out there that allow you to kind of view and inspect regular expressions and build out the regular expression that you need. We do include just a quick testing tool that allows us to test an input right here and just see what matches and what doesn't. So in this case, if I enter F00, there we go, we got a match. But if I perhaps make a typo and I put in G00 instead, well, then it's not going to match. F00, and then it does match. All right, so let's go ahead and add that. Now we can go ahead and see what that looks like in the user interface. So we'll go to our human resources category. All right, so you can see I have my staff ID here, and I'm going to go ahead and start entering this and say, oh, maybe I forget to put in the F00, so I just put in 6. All right, and I'm going to try to update this here, and HelpSpot's going to stop me and say, hey, you need to properly format the staff ID before you can continue. Okay, so then I need to go back here, add in my F00. Oh, and it's not working. What did I do wrong? There we go. All right, so now I can go ahead and update that request, and HelpSpot allows me to update that request now at this point. So as I mentioned, regular expression fields, super valuable for kind of verifying inputs as they come in. All right, another little bit more complicated field type is the Ajax selection field. So what the Ajax selection field allows us to do is it allows us to pull in data from an external source and populate it into a select list based on the data in the request. So that sounds a little complicated at first, but I'll walk us through an example of how it works at least so you can get an idea of what we can do with this type of a field. So let's say, for example, I have an external database and I want to pull in some data from there for a particular custom field. I have maybe a listing of some support types. So what we do with an Ajax custom field is we first define a script that we're going to call. In this case, what I have here is a PHP script. And if we look at the API docs for the Ajax selection field, we know that when the selection field is called, it's going to send us kind of all this different request information. So it's going to send us what the status of the request is, what the phone number on the request is, what the person's first name is, that kind of thing, all those different things. And then what HelpSpot is expecting our script to return back is a formatted listing of possible values that I can select from. So in this case, what I have here is I have an if statement that's just checking if the first name is Tim, just as an example. And then I'm returning hardware support and network support if the first name's Tim. And I'm reporting support, emergency support, custom development, and training if it is not Tim. And then I'm formatting that in the Ajax selection field XML specification, as can be seen here in these docs here. So I'm basically just giving it a value and then a description, value description for each option. So what does this look like in practice, actually? Let's try to make this a little bit more concrete. All right, so I'm going to head back over to my custom field here. So first of all, we'll just name this IT division, just so we have some name for it here. There we go. And now I'm going to specify my Ajax field URL. So this is going to be the URL of the script that I am getting all of my field values from. So in this case, I'm just calling a script that I'm hosting on my same HelpSpot server here. This could be a script that's hosted elsewhere too, could be written in something other than PHP, just needs to be a URL that HelpSpot can hit in order to get these values back. So beyond this example, some other things you could think about doing, maybe you have a product list and you want to be able to dynamically update that product list without just going through a regular select list and having to edit it all the time and add and remove different products. You could use an Ajax selection field to query your product database and have all of those values filled into a custom field for us. All right, so let's go ahead and create this field and we'll see what this looks like in practice. All right, so I'm going to head over to my workspace here, grab an IT request. Now you can see I have my IT division here, and I have this this kind of refresh button. And what that's going to do is that's going to go out and grab my possible values. So if I go ahead and hit refresh here, you'll see that I pull in support, emergency support, custom development, and training. But now this is also responsive to the data in the request. So let's say this person's name is Tim. If I refresh this again, now I'm displayed hardware support and network support, just like our logic in our script tells HelpSpot to do. So now that I have that and I select one, I can now fill in the value. And in this case, I'm filling in a ID because that's what I've specified here in my definition for the value versus the description. However, you could just fill in the exact same thing. It's completely up to you and how you script this out. So now I can just go ahead and update that request, and that value is going to be saved in HelpSpot just like any other custom field. So now I can query it inside of HelpSpot and do all those kinds of things. But really what this is allowing us to do is go out and grab dynamic data from an external source. So if this looks like something you might be interested in, if you look out in our developer or API docs, there's a whole section on the API selection field that walks through the entire specs. And we also have an example script to just kind of show you how that all works. Final thing I wanted to mention about custom fields is when you're building out your custom fields, be sure to think about more than just kind of data that you want to store, but also maybe other actions that you want to be able to trigger or perform. So, for example, you can use, excuse me, you can use custom fields in order to trigger automations. So one example of that is maybe you want to be able to reopen requests on a certain date. What you can do is you can actually create a date field in this case, and then set up an automation to reopen requests on that date. So let's go ahead and create a follow-up date custom field here. And so now on each of my categories, I have a date that I can select for when I want to follow up on this request. So I could go ahead and set this follow-up date and close out this request. And then what I can do is I can set up an automation to work with that custom field in order to reopen those requests for me automatically on that date. So let's go ahead and just build out that automation rule just to show how custom fields are going to be able to interact with the rest of HelpSpot. So in this case, this is going to be my follow-up automation. And so what I'm going to say here is if I have a request that's closed, and then my follow-up date is today, then let's go ahead and open the request and set the status to active. So now once I go ahead and, oh, we got to test that real quick. So now once I go ahead and add this rule, anytime that I close out a request with a follow-up date, HelpSpot's going to go through and reopen those requests when that follow-up date is reached. And you can get real complicated, with these kind of automation rules and triggers in order to have different actions performed. You can have it email customers, you can have it do all sorts of different things based on custom field values that you set. So as you're thinking about setting up custom fields, think about those kinds of things that you might want to do inside of your business processes as well. All right, so I think that's pretty much all I had planned for today. If you have other questions about things, maybe things I didn't cover or I need to clarify anything, feel free to put those questions into the questions area now. It looks like we have one question already here. First question is, okay, so referring back to when we were looking at the categories and the auto assignment, I mentioned that you can place a staff member out of office, which removes them um, from this pool of users that are going to be auto assigned requests. So there are two ways to do that. Each staff member can do it just by clicking on their name and then clicking on preferences. And then right inside of here, they can set themselves as user is available or forward request to. And what they can choose here is to forward request back to the inbox or to another staff member. Now, when you're working with a round robin, what that's going to actually do is it's going to just skip over them completely. So they'll just be taken out of the round robin queue completely. For requests that are explicitly assigned to them by another staff member, we can choose, a particular person that backs them up, or we can just send that request back to the inbox right away. So that's the one place where we can set it. If you have a staff member that, say, forgets to set themselves out of the office, you can also go into admin, staff, select the staff member, and pull up their profile here, and then set it right here for a different staff member. So admins are able to set out of office for any staff member. All right. Oh, we have another question here. Let's see.